if we're going to be talking about cissexism, we're kind of now in the realm of the oppressions that are a little quieter and are a little less noticed. So this one's going to need a vocab lesson. So yes. First of all, what is cis? And to do that, first we need to define trans. So transgender people are people whose gender does not really match up with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So,
sex and gender are very different things, just to define what gender is and what sex is.
Yeah, and the sex binary is a problem and is really limiting to intersex people, which we'll talk about a bit later. But generally, when people think of sex, they're thinking of the physical parts that you were given when you were born. And then gender is what you identify with. You can be female assigned at birth and then be a man. The sex does not always match up with the gender, and that's when transgender comes in. Now the word is transgender, not transgendered, which is something that a lot of people mess up on.
You don't get transgender done to you. It's a state of being.
And then it's only an adjective. You can't call someone like, you are a transgender. It is only to be used as an adjective. A transgender person, not a transgender. Then we have trans, which is kind of an umbrella, and that's with an asterisk. And so that's an umbrella term that does many different identities. There's also intersex, which is people whose sex that they were assigned at birth does not really match up with female or male. Now that can be hermaphrodite is the classic example, but there are many other different intersex identities, and they face a lot of problems with the sex binary, and a lot of them identify with the trans movement as well. Then there's gender queer, which are basically people who don't really identify with either gender that we classically identify. So they're not really male, they're not female, they don't want to specify it. It's complicated, they don't want to specify it to you, don't make them.
Or sometimes they identify with a few different genders. And
yeah, they may identify with multiple genders. There's also gender fluid, which are people who are not the same gender all the time. They flow between genders. They may be female one day and then male the other. They may have different issues navigating gender, with people wanting them to just choose. And there are also people who are agender, who just don't plain identify with gender at all. They're not anything. And those are the main vocab that people don't really run into. And then we have cisgender, which cisgender people are the ones whose sex and gender match up, and they have a really easy way of navigating gender in society.
Pretty much the world is a really simple place for them, just because that's how everything works. Everything goes.
Yeah, I am cis, and because I'm cis, I'm seen as normal. I am seen as acceptable. I am completely, I don't face any problems as far as my gender and sex not matching up. I don't face any of that.
Yeah. So, me too. So just to keep in mind, we're not the authorities on this.
Yes, these videos, never an ending point. Always a launching point. Always do your own research. Yeah. Click the resources that we have. Find your own resources. Never have this be the ending point. So the gender binary, there are only two genders. Woman, man.
To most of the world.
That's kind of how our entire society is revolved around this gender binary. There's also a sex binary, which is that there's only strictly female and male, and there's a lot of different ways of defining male and female, so it gets a little complicated with people who don't really fit all the definitions. Yeah. Intersex people are really, they have a confusing way of navigating the world because they're not strictly male or female. They're a mix of the two, or maybe not either, and it can get really complicated. So
if you look around outside, you'll see most of the signs you see will have a clearly male figure and a clearly female figure, and that's it.
Yeah, and so the
where
gender
do people
binary.
Go when they see that?
The gender binary is really encroached in society, and it can be really difficult to navigate for people who aren't strictly male or female. They don't really have any restrooms to go to that really fit their identity.
Very few places have gender-neutral restrooms.
Gender-neutral restrooms are what trans people need to feel supported. People who do strictly identify as a woman aren't always safe going in a woman's bathroom because they may not pass as a woman, which we'll talk about a bit later. So they may face real danger when they go into a woman's only restroom because even though they identify as that, they're not seen as that. The society is really cis-normative. It doesn't really differentiate between identifying as a woman and having a sex of a woman. They're always the same in society, and so it can get really dangerous for people for whom that is not true. So our society is extremely cis-normative and really pushes trans people to transition, or if they don't transition, they're not really trans, clearly. So transitioning happens when a trans person experiences gender dysmorphia. So their body, they don't feel that it's really their body. They were arbitrarily given this body. It doesn't really fit with how they feel. They want to change it somehow. And transitioning can be many things. Many people don't transition. Many trans people do not transition in any way. They are perfectly happy with their body. They just don't like the way that society arbitrarily assigns that body a gender. And so that doesn't make them not really trans. They are completely trans. That is an integral part of their identity.
If someone identifies as trans, they're really trans.
Yeah, but they don't experience that gender dysmorphia, which can be a very painful experience for people who do experience it. And so transitioning can be many things. Some people take hormones and only take hormones. Some people have bottom surgery, some people have top surgery, some people have both. So there's many different ways of transitioning, and people transition to different levels. It's a very complicated thing. But transitioning is purely up to the person. It's not necessary, and it can be a very difficult thing to get through. So if you know anyone who's transitioning...
And expensive. It can be really expensive. Some people can't afford that. So, yeah, that's part of it too.
Just support people who are in that difficult position. Try to help them all you can, whether it purely be moral support or if you can afford to help them monetarily. That's fantastic as well.
Nice.
And then society puts this extra pressure on of passing. So many trans people are really put in danger every time they go out because they don't pass as the gender that they're assigned. And so people don't see a woman walking down the street, they see a man in a dress, and they really can get violent about that.
Or paranoid. Some people get weirded out and then all kinds of things happen.
Yeah, they can really get violent about it. Cis people are really, it's really built into our society that cis people are the only people. Like
there are
trans
barely
people
any trans characters
are,
and like
they're not represented. They're especially not represented by trans people. Like the few trans people who do show up are usually represented by cis people in a stereotypical, offending representation. And so society really puts this pressure on trans people to pass as the gender that they want to be, or they're going to be hurt in some way. And it's a real problem. And by the way, if you have ever used a certain word that contains the verb ran and ends with a Y, don't use that word.
That's a slur. That's not okay.
Yeah, that is a slur that has been used against trans people for a long time. You do not have any right to use it. It may seem innocent to you, but it's a slur.
It's really
don't
offensive.
use it.
Yeah. So.
Okay. So, the movements that are going on. So there's the queer movement, which is really not doing so hot on actually keeping the T in mind.
We're talking about the general, like, huge queer movement, not like any little queer movements, you know.
Yeah, there are obviously specific queer movements that are doing well, but the queer movement in general really leaves trans people behind. It really only cares about cis gay men in general, which we'll talk about a bit more in our heterosexism video. But yeah, trans people are really left behind in the queer movement. So they have their own movement, the trans movement, and it's awesome. The trans movement is really inclusive. I don't really have any notes. Don't change, guys. You're doing well.
Wow. A great movement for once. Yeah.
Yeah. You guys are doing great. Keep it up. So, positive corner. So, Chicago House opened its first transgender housing, specifically. Recently, they cut the blue ribbon. It's all set up. And as well as offering housing services, they're going to be offering health and employment services and really offering a non-discriminatory, safe space.
Yeah, that's really great. Not many other places have that, so.
So that's really awesome.
Yeah.
The amount of transgender homeless people is really high, and we really need to be combating that. So that's an awesome thing that's happening, and we're hoping to see more of it.
Also, in the school that we go to, I live in a women-only hall, and on the bathroom it used to say female-only bathroom, and it got changed to women-only, and I think that's really impressive because that includes anyone who identifies as a woman. So, good job.
Yeah, our school's doing pretty well.
Yeah.
So that's all for now. Come with us next week to talk about heterosexism.
See ya. Comment.